Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, well, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello, fictioneers, and welcome to episode 25 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today I'm chatting to Tom Holbrook all about his craft book, Write Your Novel, First Page to First Draft. So stay tuned for that. Now it's time for Question of the Week. Now, before we get into Question of the Week, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's reached out to me with well wishes and condolences and support. The writing community really is one of the kindest places that I've ever had the privilege and the honor to be. And I'm so glad that I'm a part of this community. So thank you to everyone. I can't name you all, unfortunately. I'd love to, but thank you so much. It really makes all the difference. So for Question of the Week, I've had a few responses to the episode from question 21 of the podcast, which was how to build fictional worlds with Angeline Trevena. The question was, what's your favorite thing about world building? Megan J. Dahl said, my favorite thing about world building is always the magic. Also food, when authors create great mouth-watering sounding food. I agree on both counts. I love creating magic as a fantasy author, and it is fun to play around with taste sense and food for sure. A.E. Kincaid said, my absolute favorite thing about world building is creating the history of the world. It's funny that Angeline is your guest for this though, because my least favorite is creating maps, and she's so wonderful at that. Yeah, I agree on your first point that making up the history of the world is awesome. Demon Academy, which I'm working on at the moment, creating the backstory of the Celestial War, which happened about 25 years before the novel opens, was super fun. So yeah, I completely agree. And for anyone who hasn't seen Angeline's map making videos on TikTok, you should go and check them out. She is phenomenal. She took a lockdown hobby and made it into something that she is a pro at. So that's really cool. And Kimberly Grimes said, I love Angeline's world building and map designing skills. Yeah, we all love Angeline's world building and map designing skills. Those guides that she writes are never far from reach when I'm building a new world. I also had an answer from the question on episode 22 with Alex Corveau, which was, what's your favorite thing about revising your novel? And Emmy Grange said, the fact that every time I take insights from someone I trust, it increases my readership. And this is such a good comment because I feel exactly the same way. Every time I take advice from a trusted writer friend or someone that's a few steps ahead of me on their writing journey, not only does it increase my readership, but everything about my author business improves. So that was a really insightful comment to make, Emmy. Thank you for that. This week's question is, what's your favorite thing about starting a new writing project? You can answer in the comments on YouTube or let me know on Instagram, where I'm at Shane Miller Writes. If you want early access to episodes and exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you can participate in things like weekly accountability and Question of the Week, you can support the show on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Support the show at patreon.com/writebetterfiction. When I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording a monthly Q&A where I answer all of your writing questions. Okay, that's about it from me, so let's get into the interview with Tom. Hello, and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tom Holbrook. Tom Holbrook is a bookstore owner, typewriter repairman, and an independent publisher who has helped more than 100 authors bring their first book into the world. He's also the author of Write Your Novel, First Page to First Draft, which we're here to talk about today. And for listeners, Tom just held up the book and I highly recommend you go and get it. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
You are so welcome. So I was wondering if we could start by you telling us a bit about you and your journey into writing and editing as well.
Yeah, I live here in the New England and have owned a bookstore for 21 years. And about 10 years ago, started publishing books because people would bring books into the store to ask me to sell them. that they had self-published, and those books were always either incredibly ugly, like could spot them at 30 feet away, or they were beautiful books that somebody had paid like 15 grand to have produced and just been totally screwed. Um, or I'd get I'd get the person who came in and is like, my dad passed away. We're cleaning out the garage. I have 937 copies of his book. Do you want any of them? I'm like, printed 1,000, huh? Because 1,000 doesn't sound like that many books, but 1,000 is a lot of books. And that was right about the time that Ingram was getting into the game, and KDP was already there. And I just looked at the technology, and it was easy enough to do, and it provided a way for us to do a service to these authors and make some money, especially in the cold, dark winter months. So it was a win-win. We've done over 200 books now. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been converting to rather than acting as a vanity press, because everybody hates that word, even though, and I could talk about that all day because it's ridiculous to hate that word. But to doing hourly services, mostly because of the paperwork, like trying to keep track of royalties for 150 authors who are making like $4 a quarter, is just ridiculous. So now it's hourly, but I do everything from coaching to developmental editing to setting people up on their KDP accounts to cover design. I just really like to have a hand in all of it. And that's where I've found my main customers to be first or second time authors, because they want somebody to walk them through all the steps. And so, speaking to vanity publishing, which I say with air quotes, vanity publishing, you'll see people online saying, if you paid somebody to publish your book, it's not really published. And then you think, okay, well, did you hire a cover designer? Well, yeah. Did you hire an editor? Yeah. And it's like, well, then
Yeah.
you paid somebody to publish your book. And I mean, to be clear, these are indie authors. These aren't people with trad pubs. These are indie authors saying it's not legit to hire a vanity press. But you'll find lots of people out there who don't want to have to find a different person to handle the editing and a different person to, and I will occasionally subcontract out, but I'm like the concierge, I guess would be the word, is like really helping. Somebody comes to me, I figure out where they're at in the process, and I help them get to the end of the process. And it's really fun. It's rewarding.
Yeah, I bet. I bet it's nice to see the whole thing from start to finish. Must be cool.
I've done a lot of books that are like a memoir of an 80-year-old, which is fine. He just wants like 100 copies to give to his kids, and I'm really done with those books. I'm having so much more fun with the authors I have who are maybe on the first book in what they hope will be a series, and they're probably going to hire me for 2 or 3 books, but hopefully then grow beyond me. And that's my favorite kind of thing. So
Yeah. I edit as well, as you know, and that's the goal, isn't it? Like grow them to the point where they could move beyond you. It's perfect.
yeah, and then recommend 4 more people to you.
Yeah, of course, obviously. So the subtitle of your book then is First Page to First Draft. Could you explain the concept of what a first draft is and why it's so important for authors to understand? So what I'm getting at here is that there are misconceptions that we just sit down at the keys and the words flow from our fingertips.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for some people they do, and that's pretty cool. I think the biggest thing is that it's a whole different set of rules for first draft and for editing. And my book is really about first draft. It's really about uh, if you want some systems in place, what those systems should look like. If you don't want systems in place, what the problems you're going to run into are. I mean, caveat, I think everybody should have an outline, but that outline can be very basic. Um, but uh, but yeah, it's just the first drafting is very different. And I will tell you, I wrote my first novel at age 47 after wanting to be a novelist my whole life, but hamstrung by the fact that it had to be the great American novel or the great British novel. I mean, I would have, I'd have been fine either way. And obviously it just started and stopped and started and stopped, started to stop. It wasn't until I wrote a thriller on a lark that I had absolutely no emotional investment in that I not only was I able to finish, but I've now written 7 novels and have had a great deal of fun with each one of them. So um and that's partly because I embraced first draft, which is just get the thing out. And my coaching has a lot to do with that. And my love of story structure has a lot to do with that, because I think structure, and with it outlining, but even if you peel back the outlining and just focus on structure, structure helps you figure out what to do next.
Yes, yes, it definitely does, and I'm with you on that. So, how can authors? I mean, you talk a lot in the book about unique voices and giving your protagonist a unique voice, which I think is great. How can authors identify the protagonist's unique voice, especially for a first-time author who is probably unsure about what a distinct character voice actually is?
Yeah, although for a first-time author, for about 70% of first-time authors, their protagonist voice is going to be their voice, and that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
In fact, it's great. I recommend it highly, because it just makes it easier to write. Write someone who's like you,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and in some ways, the greater problem is all the other characters, making sure that all the other characters not only don't sound just like your protagonist, but actually have a voice that complements or contrasts your protagonist, because that's going to help you on the scene level. It's going to really make your scenes come alive when you have voices that clash. And you only know those voices clash if you're paying attention to it. Although I'd have to say a great deal of that is editing phase. Um, the thrust of my book right from the first page is don't go down the rabbit hole, uh, because there's the rabbit hole is so deep and it goes in so many directions. I mean, it just, for those of you who don't know, there's so many craft books written, and they're mostly great. You can get something great from every one of them, but you can also keep yourself from ever getting to page one. And so sometimes you've just got to like do the minimum and keep going. And when it comes to character voice, um, you need to know in your head what that person sounds like in a normal conversation, and then you need to have 2 or 3 versions of what they sound like when they're happy or when they're stressed. It depends on the kind of book you're writing, right? If you're writing a thriller, you probably want to know how your character's voice changes when they're stressed, because if it doesn't change, it will ring false to the reader. Um, and then you need incredible consistency, and that again is the editing phase. It's really, I mean, you can, if you want to really do it, you can go back through with a different color marker for each character and just look at each line and say, is that something that character would say? And you'll be sort of shocked at where you've drifted away from who that character was in your mind, just because there was like some piece of business that you wanted to get done, and you're like, oh, that person will say that, and then you look back and think that person would never say that, or they would say it in 1 sentence instead of 4 sentences, right? um, and body language and all that kind of thing. So yeah, for first time authors, write about yourself, write use yourself as a character if you can. If you have a character that's if it's your first book, you usually have had that character rattling around for a while and have a good sense of what they sound like. You might try writing it down, like why does this person sound this way? And then that will help you when you run into situations where you're having trouble with the dialogue. But it's all the people around them that takes a lot of work, and that usually takes a lot of editing.
Yeah, completely agree. And in my first book, I didn't realize this, but people I knew read it and they were like, that's you. That character is you.
You
I
didn't
was like,
realize that?
no, but yes, I do now. No, I didn't at the time completely. Yeah, I was like, no, it's not. I was adamantly against that it was me, but it pretty
Yeah,
much was.
you want to know a couple tricks. Um, if you're, a couple tricks for first time authors is, um, choose a famous person, but don't tell
Mm.
anyone that that's who your character's personality is. No, seriously.
Yeah, I
And
do it
that
all the
way,
time. I'm
yeah,
laughing because I do it.
right. Yeah, sure. Right. So, make your main character Sandra Bullock, right? Uh, make her look different. If she looks just like Sandra Bullock and talks just like Sandra Bullock, someone might figure it out. But make your main character Sandra Bullock, and that in a specific movie, not just Sandra Bullock in general, but like I haven't seen enough Sandra Bullock movies to tell you, but say it's Sandra Bullock in Ocean's 8. And that way, whenever you think, how would this person react in this situation, you just think of that person. That sounds like cheating, but you're going to take that character and put them in a completely different world with different characters to bounce off them and different plots for them to overcome. And to the reader, it's not going to sound like Sandra Bullock at all, but it's a huge shortcut when you're not writing about yourself. And then a really little one that I love, because I love little hacks, is make sure you give every character their own swear word.
Oh, nice.
And I've recently expanded that. Matt Bird, have you read The Secrets of Story?
It's literally over there to read. I haven't read it yet.
It's brilliant. It's going to blow your mind. There's like a checklist of 125 things to check in your novel, which seems a lot. Seems a lot, but his is not just swear word, but what he calls what does he call it? A metaphor family, right? So if your person grew up the son of bakers, they might use more food metaphors than someone who grew up the son of a race car driver, right? And so each of these characters, you can give them little idioms that just sort of, instead of just saying, no thanks, I don't want any spinach, they can be like, my dad always said spinach was the canned food of whatever. You know what I mean? You just make something up, but you can that. And the swear thing I learned from John Irving, actually, who always, his main characters always, they each have a different swear word that they don't use exclusively, but they return to. And you know what? You probably have one too. What's yours, Shane?
Yes, my favorite swear word is something that we say in Britain all the time that Americans are offended by, generally speaking. But I do, I love
C word.
It is, but over here it's like a term of endearment. Like we use it all the time. But no, I get what you're saying. Like I did this with one of my characters. So generally speaking, I will only let one character use fuck or something like that. Yeah. So I get what you're saying, and it can be really effective if they're all using different vocabulary around swearing, for sure.
And don't overdo it. Some people often will use the same like body language for the same emotion, which gets old really fast, right? Like they cross their arms and look to the side, and that's how they describe the character when they're upset, right? And every time the character's upset, they say he crossed his arms and looked to the side, which you don't want to do. But I'm realizing I swear when I'm frustrated, because I don't have a lot of good like, hey, buddy swears. For fuck's sake is mine.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I mean, I use that a lot, but definitely culturally, like Britain is, we will swear as like a term of endearment to a best friend or whatever. Yeah, that's funny. That is so funny.
Anyway, those are a couple quick little things for character, but a lot of character voice, as I said, will be in editing.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of character, what I really liked as well in your book was when you touched on character flaw, and speaking about how heroes and antagonists both need flaws, because we always focus a lot on the protagonist flaw, the hero's flaw. So how can writers give protagonist and antagonist deep flaws that make sense, and also what pitfalls should we be aware of while we do this?
So in the book I have what I call the 5 tent poles, but this is just basic story structure. Everyone has a different way of talking about it. It can be very complicated. If you're doing hero's journey, you could have like 13 steps or whatever, but I have basically the inciting incident, point of no return, the midpoint, the choice, and the finale. And the more I work on books, the more I combine the choice and finale. So maybe it's 4 tent poles, but the number one thing that you can do is is figure those plot points out for your antagonist before you start, and also figure them out for your antagonist before you start. So just pretend the antagonist is the hero of the story, right? Like, what's the thing that makes them kick this off? Did they fall into a vat of chemicals? Did they have their heart broken by the girl that you're trying to date? It depends. It doesn't matter the genre. Like, what set them off as your antagonist? uh have you seen Across the Spider-Verse yet? The new Spider-Man.
Yes, yeah, I
It's
have. Yeah,
so
so good.
good.
Yeah,
It's so
really
good.
good.
But the spot is like, I'm your nemesis. You created me. And Spider-Man's like, what the heck? What are you
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about, dude? But it's a perfect example, right? Something happened to Spot that made him the villain. That
yes,
made him in. So he's got his own inciting incident, and he's got his own point of no return where he takes action that makes him more villainous, right? And then you know, uh, he's got a choice, and the villain usually makes the wrong choice that makes whatever they were trying to do fail. I mean, it fails because of the hero, but it also fails usually because of something that they've uh, misconstrued or set up wrong. Uh, but yeah, if you just do those 5 steps for your antagonist, you're gonna have a, a big head start.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about tentpole scenes there. Can you elaborate more on what exactly they are and how they
Yeah,
shape the narrative?
there's again, there's dozens of different ways to outline.
Yeah.
Um, these sort of crucial scenes of the inciting incident, which is the thing that kicks off the story, the point of no return, which is what I call it, but some people call it, Blake Snyder, which is great. If you haven't read Save the Cat, right? I
Fantastic.
like the screenplay one better than the novel one,
Oh,
actually,
really? That's interesting.
in terms of simplicity, just
Yeah,
in
fine.
terms of simplicity. But
Fine.
he calls it break into two because it's going from act one to act two is where that point of no return is, and that's just when the hero can't decide they don't want to do it anymore, or
Mhm.
if they do, horrible things will happen.
Yeah.
It's the okay, I'm in, right?
Yeah.
So it's Dorothy deciding to go down the yellow brick road,
Mhm.
um, and then the midpoint is self-explanatory in some ways, but actually is the one that kills everybody, because um it's often called the soggy middle or the messy middle.
Mhm.
And what I talk about in the book, probably not very well, but there's a whole book called Start Your Book from the Middle, by Scott. Anyway, you'll find it.
Yeah,
There's
James
not
Scott Bell.
not that
Yeah.
many books called Start Your Book in the Middle. um but what I try to explain is there's actually 2 midpoints. They happen near each other. If they happen in the same scene, it's like gold. But somewhere in
Mm.
the middle of your book, there is going to be an internal midpoint and an external midpoint. And you got to have both of them. And the internal midpoint is it's when the character really questions themselves, and it's usually when the character realizes what their flaw is. But it's not the fixing of the flaw.
Mm.
It's I've got a problem. I see I've got a problem. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to save everybody. I'm going to do it. And then the third quarter of your story is them trying to change, but they're trying to do it using their old tools. And it's not until you get to the big sort of finale climax where they say, "Oh, this different way of doing things, all that everyone's been telling me is what I need to do. It's uncomfortable and I didn't want to do it and I dragged my feet, but now I get it." In Star Wars, it's Luke. Do you use the Force or do you use the Targeter? It's so many superhero movies, right? Because they always get the abilities early on in the movie, and then they have a good time, and then they realize in the midpoint, hey, this isn't working out so well.
Yeah.
I'm going to fix things, but they usually try to fix things using their old tricks. Same for romance, right? Um, thriller can work the same way. Mystery is a little different with a detective, but for most stories it works the same way. And then the external midpoint uh, is the problem suddenly gets bigger. Quite often with a ticking clock. Ticking clock's a great way to go. So if
Mm.
you're in the middle of your if you're in the middle of your book and you're like, I'm dying, how do I get to the finale? I can't. I'm on page 100. The finale can't start until page 200, or it's going to be a novella. How do I get there? And one of the answers is bring in a ticking clock, man. Right? Like you've got to you've got to find her and propose before she gets on the flight at midnight, right? Or
Yeah.
you've got to, throw the ring in the big volcano before or everybody dies, right? So a ticking clock really, really helps move things. But so many people, when you talk about structure, they've got the inciting incident and they've got sort of the climax, and those are you can get away with just those two things. When I talk about outlining, I will sometimes tell people, look, you can have a 2-point outline if you have a
Mm.
good character, and you know your character's flaw, which we can talk about in a minute. But you can have a 2-point outline, which is they get into trouble and they get out of trouble as a changed person, right? And that's it. But
Yeah.
then it, uh, but for a first time author, that's kind of hard because they want to know, okay, where do I go now? Where do I go now? Where do I go now? So, but you can get away with just that if you're using one of my favorite tricks, which is the because of that trick.
Mm.
So the because of that trick is how you know what the next scene to write is. So you look at the scene you just wrote and you say, because of that, which sounds dumb. You say it out
Yeah.
loud, it sounds even dumber. But if you do that, you are going to write a very tight manuscript that you can then go back and flesh out more if you want and put in side quests and all sorts of things. But at its heart, if you're floundering in a scene, it's usually because you haven't asked that question, right? And so you're like, I can't get through this barbershop scene, and you haven't asked, like, why are they at the barbershop, right? And if they're not at the barbershop because the barber has a important piece of information, or because you can't get into the gala without a new haircut and shave, and you're going to go to the barber and then you're going to go to the tailor. I mean, whatever the thing. But quite often people, when they get bogged down, they are in a scene that they don't need, or that they don't need at that time. And they're trying to just give the reader a whole ton of information that the reader does not want, because the reader wants something to happen.
Yeah.
Um, so in my best case scenario, somebody uses their idea for a character and that character's flaw. They come up with their 5 tent poles, and then they string as many scenes as they have in their mind in between, and that's their outline. And it may have some holes, but they use the sort of because of that to get from one point to the other until they've got a first draft, and then you can fix everything after.
Yeah, definitely. And you say there that because of that thing sounds dumb when you say it out loud. I don't agree with that at all. I think you're selling yourself short there, because there are a lot of craft books that explain that in a very complex way, and it doesn't need to be that complex. And when I read
Right.
the way you described it, it blew my fucking mind, because I thought people are gonna um this is going to resonate with people because it's something easy that they can understand. If you just,
Yeah.
because of that, this is going to happen. It's not
Right.
about, like, we use a lot of terms like progressive complication
Mm-hmm.
and
Or
things
just
that are hard for people to
yep.
understand.
Yeah, just conflict.
Yeah.
I'm a 3-story method editor, and I'm a big fan of the 3-story method, which says there has to be conflict in every scene. But a lot of
Mm.
people just don't understand what that means. They think,
Yeah.
what, it has to be a fight? It has to be
Yeah.
is there has to be a motorcycle race in every scene? No. Uh, but a lot of my editing is saying to people, this is a very nice chapter that has no emotional or character conflict. It's just giving me information. And you need to figure out a way to get rid of that and give us the information in some other way. And uh and actually, when you think of because of that, the because of that is almost never going to be. Because of that, they had to sit down and have 10 pages of exposition. Every once in a while it is, right?
Yeah.
There's usually like that one scene where they're like, here's the uh you know, here's the backstory. Here's how hard it's going to be to break into the Bellagio and steal everything, right? They've got
Yeah.
they And that scene has its own, depending on the genre, it's got its own sort of like necessity and should be fun, right? Um, so that's, yeah. So just that, because of that, can really help you when you're stuck.
Yeah,
At least to get through the first draft, right? You're like, okay, even if you like put a place marker in it, right? Like, okay, because of that, this has to happen, but I don't know how the heck I'm going to write that. So because of that, we move on, and then you can go back and fill it in.
yeah, much easier way of explaining it. We've kind of spoken about the messy middle and what it is, so I'm going to change the next question ever so slightly. Authors struggle with the messy middle, and now you've explained what it is, I think that's clearer to people. Act 2 is a big act, and it's not just about that middle plot point. So what can people put around that plot point to actually flesh out that second act? Because we hear a lot about how the second act is the hardest one because it's huge.
Yeah, which is why I really prefer thinking of it as 4 acts, but that it just gets too confusing for people. But when you think about it, it's more 4 act structure, and if you think about it that way, there's some little tricks that you can do to help you get through it. And here I'm borrowing from a lot of other people, so a lot of what comes out of my mouth is something I stole, which is fine because
Fine.
art is theft.
Yes.
But one, to go back to Blake Snyder, he has something called fun and games section. And the fun and games section is my favorite. It's the section between the point of no return and the midpoint. It is also described as the promise of the premise, which is confusing, but it basically means like, what did you come to this book for? Right? It's what's in the trailer of the movie, right? If it's a James Bond movie, it is it's part of a car chase. If it's a comedy, it's one of the funniest scenes in the movie that may not it's not going to give away the plot, or the may not have the huge emotional moment in it that may be later in the movie, but this is what people showed up for. So, I have my series is about a woman who sort of accidentally becomes a vigilante, and she is not good at it. And so my fun and games part is her getting her cover blown, her accidentally wrecking her friend's Subaru, it's all that sort of stuff. And you can put you can put string together 4 or 5 scenes there from the point of no return that really celebrate what you've decided the book is about. Also, great place to introduce your B story if you've got a B story, which is another whole it's another whole topic. And on a first draft, I might say, don't worry about the B story. But a lot of people already have the B story in their head. You ask what your book's about and they tell you, and then they say, and then they have this friend who's also doing such and such. Or it's an action thriller, but this is where they fall in love or something like that. So it's a good place to introduce your B story. It's a good place to have fun. And have fun can be horrible, right? If you're in a horror novel, it's where things, right? They've decided that they are going to go into the haunted house, and it's where bad stuff starts happening. People start dying. That's still fun and games.
Yeah.
And then the mirror moment, the middle moment, and if you don't think this is true, just watch some movies and note how long they are, and then go to the middle. I watched it was the live action Mulan.
Oh yeah, I watched that recently.
And good. Okay, so if you go exactly to the middle, there is a point where she has been on the battlefield. She's all by herself, and she takes off her disguise, not to shock anyone, but because she's had it with she's had it with being in disguise, right? She hasn't solved anything yet. she's not the great hero yet, but there is it's the mirror middle point where she says, I can't be this anymore. And uh I call it the mirror middle because it's often, if you picture your character looking in the mirror and talking to themselves, right? They look in the mirror and they say, something's got to change. I can't do this anymore. They sometimes come right out and know what their flaw is, right? Like, she will never take me back because I'm unfaithful, right? Or she'll whatever it might be. And that mirror moment is going to launch you into part 3. We'll call it the third quarter of the story, which is still in act 2, but it's going to launch you into that because they are going to try to fix the problem. The problem is they're going to use all the wrong methods to try to fix it. And this sounds like I'm oversimplifying, but this is just like in so much of story structure that you watch, right? So like in superheroes, they're like, "Ooh, I got this power now. Girl's gonna like me," right?
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna go back in time and save my family, right? That's a great one, right? That happens in the middle of the movie. That doesn't happen at the beginning, doesn't happen at the end. That happens in the middle of the movie when they realize they have power, they realize something in their life is broken, and they're going to try to fix it. So then the third quarter of your story, the second half of that second act, is you can string together, okay, like, how can this go wrong? Or how can it seem to go right? Sometimes it seems to go right and then everything goes wrong. But what are 3 or 4 scenes that I can think of where, like, okay, well, how does that work out when they go and tell their mom, right? How does that work out when they quit their job? What actually happens? Is it what they expected? Is it not what they expected? And it's also when you can throw in a ticking clock, right? Like, oh my gosh, I realize I've been doing this all wrong. I've got to fix it, and time is going to run out. And so then you're moving faster. So then you're like, okay, what's 5 scenes of them trying to fix it before time runs out? And then when we get to our choice/finale is when that character is going to realize, like, oh, this is how I have to fix it. And it's going to be the biggest challenge yet. It's going to be after multiple failures. I think we can talk about finale because it's really interesting to me how often people get this wrong. Or wrong's a hard word, but they get it. It's very it's just not there.
Definitely.
Remarkably. And a lot of times it's because people are afraid that it's not going to be believable. It's like, dude, fiction's not believable, right? So the finale, and we didn't go deep into flaw, but I think most people know what a character's fatal flaw is. It's become fairly normal lexicon. But the fatal flaw is the thing that's keeping them from being the person that they want to be. It's what's making their life miserable, and usually they don't know what it is at the beginning. Although somebody quite often will tell them early on in the book, and they won't pay any attention to them. That's a great scene too. If you're looking for scenes to fill in your outline, the scene where someone states the theme is a great one to have up and early. You try in your book about beginnings, don't you say, hey, you could put that theme right on in the first couple of pages.
I do touch on that, and like, I call it the advice and refusal. So they'll either
exactly, yes,
they'll either receive advice from someone, they'll ignore it, or they'll read something like in a magazine that tells them what they need to do, and they ignore it. Right. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as someone saying, like, man, you got to be nicer to people.
Yeah.
Right. And it feels like a throwaway line, but then that's really the problem, is that they've got to be nicer to people. Anyway, once you have this flaw, then your finale has to be the resolution of that flaw. And that seems simple, but what a lot of people do is, one, they create a character with no flaw, which is boring.
Yes.
And they think, the external struggles will be enough to make this a story, but it can't be. They have to have a flaw that they have to overcome. And Then the second mistake people make is that they don't connect the finale to the flaw. It may happen at the same time, but it's not integral. And
Mhm.
so an example of this is, your character is afraid of the dark because they fell down a well as a child and whatever. They have deep anxiety about the dark. And in the finale, they are fighting the villain on the top of a skyscraper with helicopters flying around and things exploding. And somewhere along there, they decide they're not afraid anymore. But it's not they don't have to crawl through a pitch black tunnel to get to the other side where they are going to save the day, right? So that's what you need to do. The flaw needs to be part of the finale. It needs to be an integral part of the finale. And if you know what the flaw is at the beginning, it makes the finale easier to write. If you know what the finale is at the beginning of your writing, it makes the flaw easier to write. It can go either way. And I touch on this in the book, but it's one of my favorite things is that I will read a manuscript by someone, and either they could have a fantastic plot points and the character is just cardboard, or they could have a fantastic character and nothing happens. Um and helping people make that connection of the flaw and the finale have to go together. And you see it in good movies, right? It's always the thing. It's always the thing that the hero didn't want to face is
Yeah,
the thing, is
yeah,
the thing
it
that they
is. We've
have to face.
spoken about superhero movies a lot, but they are
Yeah,
an easy way to go and look at some of this stuff where
yeah.
they connect flaw to the finale for
But it's
sure.
the same for romances too, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
a lot of the best romances have the early lie, right? Like, I'm
Mm.
going to pretend that I have a different job than I have, or I'm gonna, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
uh and um and never addressing their unwillingness to commit or their fear of being hurt or whatever. And then at the end they have to do that, or they're not going to live happily ever after if they can't overcome that flaw. Fatal flaw is huge in romance,
mm.
right? I mean, it's sort of because you don't have giant spectacles to distract
Yes.
people from the fact that you don't have the emotional payoff. It's all about emotional payoff. So and you only have emotional payoff if the character does the thing that the audience has been dying for them to do the whole book, right? And that's resolve the flaw that the character didn't know that they had at the beginning, but the audience totally knew.
Yeah,
Right. And that's again why I love trying to help people fix the middle, because the audience is in on it and the character's not in on it until the midpoint. And then at the midpoint, the audience is always like, oh, they're gonna get it now. And then they don't get it. And the audience is like, what are you doing? Idiot. It's so obvious. Um, and and there is something incredibly satisfying to a reader to have that resolution where the sort of the the emotional resolution that they assumed was coming all along is actually going to show up. um but then when it comes to the actual plots, I'm constantly telling people to go bigger,
mm.
constantly, because we're afraid that we're overdoing it, that it's not realistic. And um you want each, as you go through the movie, each of these conflicts, you want them to get bigger and bigger and bigger, so it should make sense that the last one is the biggest.
Yeah.
But so often it's not in a first draft in a manuscript. So I always tell, there's a great trick, if people are writing down tricks, which and I'm sure you're thinking like, oh, I don't want to have to write anymore.
Stop.
But stop. But because this is going to sound like a lot of work, but it's not. But
Yeah.
write your finale point, right? Your plot point. You don't have to write the whole scene, but be like, okay. And then at the end, he's going to jump on the train at the last minute, and everyone's going to live happily ever after. And you may have had this ending in your head before you even started, because I know I have started books where I knew what the finale was. So it's hard to let go, but you may end up with your first choice. But then write 5 more finale plot points, right? And each one crazier, right? Like he misses the train, so he jumps on a motorcycle and races down the sidewalk alongside of the train and then jumps from a bridge onto the train. Or he jumps at the last minute onto the train and looks out the window and to see that she's actually on a different train. And then how does he get on the other train? I'm just making stuff up as I go along. But you do 5 or 6 of those and make them bigger and crazier in each time. And hopefully one of those is going to be like, yeah, that's a lot, but it works, because trust me, your readers will enjoy it more if it's bigger. And if it's totally outrageous, then your editor is going to be like, this is totally outrageous.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. Definitely.
Which, we can talk about editors, but a good editor is going to say, I'm not buying this.
Yeah.
But they might not say, this is too boring. It depends on your editor. Some editors just want to help you smooth it out and be like, check, please. Right. And others want to really help you get the best story, which of course is subjective.
Yes, of course. But it's interesting you said about, because what I've noticed with newer editing clients, like if I've edited people before or they're experienced, this is not so much the case. But with newer editing clients specifically, I often find, like, we know as experienced editors, like you just said, the most conflict, the most tension should be in the climax, like the highest stakes, the flaw should be resolved, all of those things. But I tend to find that with newer clients, they always pack the most conflict and tension into that lowest moment, or the plot point 2, or the dark night of the soul. And I think that's because we pay so much attention to that. That tends to be the plot point that is most discussed, I think. And we often miss that the climax needs to be the biggest thing, right?
Yeah. Or I think also we miss that there were so many different ways to have emotional conflict, that you can have very emotional small scenes. But when you get to that finale, it's got to be the hardest choice emotionally, and it's got to be one that changes the character forever. And if that's not it, then that's not your finale. I think. Another thing, I could talk all day. Obviously, I like to talk about story structure. I love to talk about story structure. I love to talk about stories. It's funny because, I think you have to drink if I mention Clifton Strengths. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I don't actually have. I have water, so that's not going to do anything. But yeah,
5 out of my top 6 are green strategic. And what I finally come to realize is that I have the soul of an artist, but I am a mechanic. I am the guy at the rock and roll show who wants to be close to the front so that they can see the guitar pedals.
Yeah.
Right. Not so that they can throw their arms around and scream. Like, I'm the person at the museum who wants to look sideways at the painting so that I can see how the brushstrokes were put on. It's just, I like to pull things apart and see how they work. And so I've, really embraced editing. But you look back, like all the way back to high school, like hanging around with friends talking about movies or whatever, it was always about like, how did they do that shot? How did they make that? So and this is why, like, the very beginning of my book is like, don't go down the rabbit hole. I've done it for you.
Yeah.
Right. Don't go down. I spent 30 years going down the rabbit hole and not writing a damn thing. But there are some hardcore things that you can take with you to get that first draft done. And structure is one, and make it as simple as you possibly can, unless you already have a ton of ideas, and then you can try to slot them in. And then the other, which we haven't talked about at all, but the other is, and this sounds so hackneyed, but it is show, don't tell. And it's besides a sort of lack of structure, it's the number one thing that I send coaching clients back to the drawing board on. I was working with a wonderful author who has a PhD in political science and is a professor, and she's retired. She's written a YA fantasy. And I was like, okay, look at this chapter. Your main character just spent the whole chapter telling somebody else what just happened previously. And but you didn't show it happening.
Yeah.
We don't want hearsay. We don't want hearsay. We want the story itself. Or I gave her so much crap. I was like, in this scene, what you do is you tell the reader what's going to happen. You have it happen, and then you tell the reader about what happened, which is how you write a PhD paper.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
exactly
quite.
how you write a nonfiction PhD paper, right? It's not how you write a novel, right? So just you need to show it happening, because when you show it happening, you have a couple things. The biggest of which is more sensory detail. When someone's telling about something that happened, they don't usually stop to mention the how the moss smelled and how the mist was in the air, right? You have more sensory detail. You have more dialogue, which is how you convey emotion. If you just tell the reader that she was sad, it doesn't work. You've got to show the person being sad, and the best way to do that is through dialogue. Dialogue trumps everything when it comes to showing emotion. And as our friend Jeff at the dialogue doctor says, um, along with because of that, another very easy trick for someone first time drafting is saying, how do I want the reader to feel at the end of the scene? And just acknowledging that your scene has an emotional component, that it has a personality, if you want to get goofy about it.
Yeah.
But right, but like, what is the personality of the scene at the beginning and at the end? And it should change, because if it's not changing, then your scene's not turning. But we don't have to use turns like your scene turning or conflict or anything. All we have to ask is, is this scene happening because of the previous plot point, and how do you want the reader to feel about it? And once you decide how do you want the reader to feel about it, you can't just tell them to feel that way. You've got to show them, and you show them with dialogue. But yeah, number one note is usually turn this into a scene. I'll highlight a paragraph, and the note is turn this into a scene.
Yeah.
Turn this into a scene. Turn this into a scene. And that means a lot of rewriting, although for some, which is fine, because usually there's about a third of the book that I tell them to take out. Or for people who are write short, right? Like they had this idea and they've written the whole thing, and they're like, wait, I'm only at 100 pages. It's usually because they haven't turned narrative paragraphs into scenes. Um, and when you write a scene that is dialogue heavy and does not push forward the plot or the character or the emotion, it's actually pretty obvious.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Because you can sense the emotional shifts with dialogue better than you can with most other things.
And you're gonna be like, that scene was funny, but nothing happened.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no like shift anywhere. And yeah, for sure. Okay, we've spoken about a lot of challenging things that an author might come across, but what do you think is the most challenging thing about writing a novel, and how would you, or how does your book address that?
The most challenging things is all the things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a fire hose. And again, my book's super short because I tried to leave all that stuff out. Again, I tried to say, get your first draft done, then go down the rabbit hole all you want. You see a similar thing with people once they publish their book. It's like, should I have a website? Should I have a newsletter? Should I have ads? And it's just like, whoa, there's so much information. You just need to dial it back and do the first thing. And for drafting, for me, the first thing is either who is my character and what is their flaw, and therefore what does the finale have to look like? Or it's what is my story? What is my finale? And who is the character that would best illustrate that? They go either way. You can start either way, right? Because every writer is different. So I think I have an example in the book. This is some writer is going to be on the subway and be like, ooh, we're going into this tunnel. What if we came out in another dimension? And then the question is, okay, what kind of character would that freak the hell out?
Mm.
And what kind of journey would they go on? Emotional journey would they go on? Or the flip side of that is, hey, look at that guy sitting across from me. Uh, you know, what's what would really freak him out? Would it be if we came out in another time zone, right? If we came out in
Yeah.
another planet, like what would that mom of four do if we came out the other side of this tunnel on another planet, right? So then, and that's actually the inciting incident and not the finale, but you can find the finale pretty quickly after that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be about getting home. I
Yeah.
would assume a mom of four, unless she really hates her kids, and then could be anything else.
It could be anything, yeah.
Right. It depends, but that's because that it can't be anything else. It's going to depend on who you decide that character is.
Yeah, right.
Right. But just knowing who your character is going to make it easier to do plotting. So I say boil it everything down to that. And the advice that you give everybody, I'm sure you give them the same advice that nobody takes, is just shit it out, man. It's just the first draft, and that's super hard. I don't really take that advice myself when I'm writing. So
no, but I should. It is the correct advice. For most people.
Yeah. I find my tolerance for editing other people is really high. And for editing myself is like, I don't want to go back and do that. So luckily, again, I write total popcorn stories. So mostly what I do is going back is adding emotional content. Right. Like that happened too fast, slow that down. So for a lot of people it's slow it down. And for a lot of people it's not speed it up, but like you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're telling me about something that I don't need to know about. And so if I were to start with you from scratch, I would say know your character or know your story, create the counterpart, right? The two F's, the flaw and the finale. And then try to get as many scenes as you can on a note card, right? Try to do it. I'm a big fan of outlining, even though you never end up using it all.
Yeah, never.
But if someone says like, I'm a pantser, I just can't do it. I'm like, okay, well, where are you pantsing yourself to? Right. You at least have a destination.
Yeah.
And the first novel that I wrote, I had the final scene in my head. I saw it so clearly. And I also had the first scene. I'm like, okay, I just need 30 scenes. And so I was doing a lot of because of that, but I was also doing a lot of how do I change the direction, right? How do I want to be over there. Like my story's going over here to the left, but I need to be over there to the right because I know that's the scene I want. And it becomes pretty clear, like, okay, well, if she's going to end up there, then something has to happen. If she's going to be all by herself, because I want her to be just her against the antagonist, then we've got to get rid of all the sidekicks. So I need a scene where they peel off or are defeated or whatever. And so having the beginning and the end is great if you can do it. Some people just don't know the end yet. And I think that's really hard. And I think that leads to a lot of rewriting. I think you have less rewriting if you start with an ending and end up changing that ending than if you start with no ending whatsoever and just think, oh, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, definitely. Because at least you know then where it's got to end up. And that is helpful because then you can work backwards if you want. Like it doesn't really matter how you do it.
No, or you can get 2/3 of the way through and say this ending's not going to work based on what I've already written, but you probably wouldn't have gotten that far if you hadn't been following some sort of structure. So all the pantsers can come at me, but I just I just feel like you have to have that minimum, some idea of some signpost of where you're going.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you're in for a lot of rewriting.
A lot, and it's not fun. It might be for some people. It's not fun for me.
Yeah, if you want to get done. I mean, some people don't want to get done. It's emotionally heavy to get done, right? It means judgment. getting done means judgment.
And that's funny because I like editing myself. Like you don't. You're the worst thing for you is like editing yourself.
Yeah.
I like editing myself, but when I have huge amounts of rewrites, not so much. Like if I've got the basic structure and I'm doing the fun stuff like foreshadowing and emotional payoff and all that stuff, that's great. But major structural rewrites are not fun in any
Yeah.
way.
When you realize like, oh, there's 10,000 words I'm gonna have to cut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not fun. Okay, cool. This is the Write Better Fiction podcast, and I usually ask all my guests why they write fiction, and I could have asked you that, but I wanted to ask something a little bit different based on our conversation today. So, Tom Holbrook, what's the best thing about helping writers shape their stories?
Oh, it's the aha moment. Hopefully the aha moment, and not the I guess we're done working together moment, which
Yes.
I've really gained some confidence over the last 4 or 5 years because I'm not a classically trained editor, but the people who come to me for vanity publishing rarely want to change anything, and so I've had customers in the past who I've said, let me just do a light developmental edit for you. In other words, I'm going to write you 2,000 words on what you need to change in your thing, and then I won't charge you for that if you're not into it. And so far, everyone, even the diehards, like it's done, have been like, oh yeah, I see that. But the best is the sort of aha moment, like I had with this college professor who's like, oh, I see it so clearly. Um, and she was like, my 17-year-old son put a note in the margins is basically the same thing. I should have been listening to him. Which was, in that case, it was showing and not telling. But it doesn't matter what it is. It's I have changed. I would say my biggest philosophy shift over the last few years is don't ask me whether your book is any good, because I don't know what that means. I mean, technically I can tell you, but
Yes.
The commercial success is so remote and getting more remote by the day. And not to be Debbie Downer here, but here's Debbie Downer. But the commercial success is so remote that the question I want to ask you, the writer, is what is the story that you're trying to tell? What do you want the reader to feel? And then as an editor, I'm very good at saying, you're not getting there, and it's because of this or this or this, because I've seen enough to know that those things hold up the reader from getting to where you want to be. And so when people have that moment of like, now I'm telling the story that I wanted to tell, it also it clarifies their plotting quite a bit too.
Yes.
Quite often when someone's lost on plot, it's because they weren't paying attention to the story they were trying to tell about their character, and they got lost on the side plots and trying to justify things happening when there was an easier way to do it. So yeah, the most fun is seeing people totally get it.
Great. Perfect way to end the show. So can you tell everyone a little bit about where they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Yeah, I'm Tom Holbrook, and I'm at authorhelp.net, spelled exactly like it sounds, authorhelp.net, but also my company's called the Holbrook Author Services, which you'll get there if you go to authorhelp.net. I particularly like to work with first or second time authors who want to write multiple books. And I will tell you what I think of your book, which is actually sometimes hard to find.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not an asshole about it, but if you work with me, I'm going to be as kind as possible, but I am not going to say, yeah, it's fine if it's not fine. So I'm going to tell you what I think honestly, and then you can choose what to act on and what not to.
Right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Tom. That was fantastic.
All right. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Tom and picked up a ton of actionable tips on how to write your novel. Join me next week when I'll be chatting to book marketing expert Becky Robinson all about marketing strategies for authors. Have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favourite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.